Did you see the owner of the Patriots told the NFL he wants to do a game in Scotland? He's so impressed by the fans.
Boston doesn't have a single beer left in town, from what I understand.
Yeah, that's what I hear. And they also, they particularly ran out of that. They had ordered the Scottish beer. Is it Tennant, I think? But they ran out. They ran out of everything.
Tennant, nothing. Belhaven, baby. Always did Belhaven.
Belhaven. Okay. Mother of Yorkins is joined. Arizona RN is
Pretty
here.
proud, exactly.
Wow,
Get a browser up here so I can catch
Friday afternoon.
questions. An opportunity again tonight. Thank you everyone for being here. An opportunity to ask questions of your expert friend here, Frank Figliuzzi, instead of merely being one direction where we think of things to say and Frank brings you his experience. Now you guys have a chance to speak back. And I see Tina Marie is already in here, so we will answer for Tina's question that was already on the table. What was the giraffe found, Frank?
Well, that was my good news story of the week, and now we're going to get right up. But yes, I posted on Instagram that Gracie the giraffe has been found healthy, and apparently they're describing her as fat. Maybe she ate more than usual when she was away from friends and family. But who doesn't do? Who doesn't do? I don't know
exactly. So while Frank shares some things he's seen in the week, I'm going to be reading your posts down here. And so for us, they sometimes disappear on the phone, but I've got the roster here. So please ask your questions here. And if you're not a paid subscriber, a subscriber for Frank's account, push that button, grab that opportunity. And, I'll say this, like, I'd love to brag on you guys. We used to watch you from a distance and it was very one way. CNN or MSNBC or someone brought you on, asked you questions, and people gathered to your voices. That's why I think they like those networks, and now they're available to you. So I think it's really good when people can have this direct interaction with you guys.
Yeah, folks, I'll echo what Chris said. These Fridays, the Frank Friday shows that I'm committed to now, which would be the third show of the week at least. I may do more. As you know, I do Monday and Wednesday for Lincoln Square, 2 p.m. Eastern Time. Great guests, high quality guests. By the way, as people continue to filter in, Monday's scheduled guest, Senator Richard Blumenthal. We're going to really dig into some of the biggest issues facing this country with Senator Blumenthal. We've already had Senator Mark Warner, Vice Chair of the Senate Intel Committee. We've had Congressman Chris Murphy from the House Intel. I mean, we're just going to keep having guests like this, and sometimes we'll lighten it up. We just had this week comedian Maz Jobrani. If you haven't seen that, check that out. The recorded versions of those shows are always available for paid subscribers. The live versions are available for everybody. And my shows, like Friday, like today, like this one, available, recorded or not. I'd love for you to subscribe, but I want to emphasize what Chris Sampson just said, who's kind enough to MC for us tonight. His job tonight is to read your questions to me, so I don't miss that. I want you to ask me questions. I'm going to tee up some of the stories that grabbed me this week, and boy, were there some. But it's all about me talking less, you asking questions, and I responding to them. And you can ask anything you want about the news stories of the week, other things troubling you. They don't have to be just about what I'm teeing up for us tonight. And if you have questions about, some of you have had questions about how the Substack account works. Some of you have been helpful in pointing out some difficulties you might be having in accessing the recorded versions of shows. And I want to know that. I want to know if there are glitches, of course. So I can try to get the powers that be to work on that. Okay, so we are at the top of the hour, and we're approaching 160 guests so far. I'm sure it will go up. Let's go ahead, and I'm going to tee up some stories that grabbed me, and then I'll hit the pause button and Chris is collecting your questions, and we'll hit them, and then we'll go to a next story, etc., until we're questioned out. Although I think we probably could go quite some time with questions, but we all have other things that we need to do. All right. So look, not in any particular order, but I need to address what you may have already paid attention to this week, which is the sentencing of 8 alleged Antifa members in two federal courts in Texas this week. I want to talk about that because it's much bigger than just those 8 people being sentenced. Here's what grabbed me. First, the sentences were between 30 and 100 years in federal prison. The sentencings happened in 2 different federal courts at the same time. The judges in those 2 courts that handed down those sentences, one was appointed by Donald Trump, one was appointed by George W. Bush. I think that matters here, but even far greater than that, legal experts are calling those sentences, the lengths of those sentences. And we'll talk about what these folks did, what they didn't do, and how come we're looking at these harsh sentences. They've been calling them stunningly severe, outrageous, extremely rare. I think that's the mildest description I've heard of these sentences. So what are we talking about with these 8 people? All right. I want to put one defendant in a bucket of his own, and then I want to talk about the others. One defendant, whose last name is Song, S-O-N-G, was responsible for shooting a city police officer, shooting and wounding a city police officer, and he got the most severe sentence. He got that 100-year sentence. Now, I want to say something here. You know who I am, 25 years, federal agent. If you shoot a cop, you should expect to go to prison for a very long time. That's how it works. We could argue about 100 years, and people are arguing about it, and certainly his lawyers are arguing about the 100 years because, God, I don't recall in my 25 years in law enforcement a 100-year sentence for mere. I don't want to downplay shooting, but the officer, thankfully, was not seriously injured and is going to survive. I want to put Mr. Song in his own bucket because he made a decision to shoot a police officer who was simply responding to a call for help at an ICE facility in the Fort Worth area of Texas. He gets out of his car and he's almost immediately shot. All right. Yeah, I'm sorry, but you're going away to prison for a very long time. 100 years is extremely unusual, but all of these are extremely unusual. One woman her maximum sentence per federal sentencing guidelines, maximum should have been 60. The judge, this is very rare in federal court, the judge gave her 70 years. Exceeded the sentencing guidelines. So what happened? And why should we care? The group was labeled Antifa. And a charge equally noteworthy is that the charges against them included material support to terrorism, which is generally reserved, and I mean almost entirely reserved, for international terrorism. Al-Qaeda, ISIS, Boko Haram, Hezbollah, etc. How did we get to the place where we are now calling U.S. citizens terrorists and using previously unavailable, unused international terror charges against them? Well, after Charlie Kirk was murdered, Donald Trump came out with a presidential national security memo ordering the DOJ to investigate Antifa and designating Antifa a domestic terror group. We have no mechanism for designating a domestic terror group. I know Donald Trump doesn't care about policies, procedures, and mechanisms. So he did it in a memo. He ordered DOJ to investigate left-wing terrorists. This group of 8 was labeled terrorists, were labeled terrorists, and were labeled Antifa. Let me explain something, and you already know this. There is no definition of Antifa. There is no leadership structure. At best, you could make potentially an argument that it's a loosely, the word organized is about to come out of my mouth, and I got to tell you, I don't know if there's any organization beyond local associates of each other. That's all. I've not seen evidence that it's an organized terror group. But here we are, folks. And these people, some of them will die in prison, certainly Mr. Song, unless they win appeal. And they are appealing. But the jury, so listen, the grand jury had to go along with it in indicting them on terrorism charges. The judges had to go along with it in sentencing and even exceeding the maximum sentencing guidelines in one instance. This is part of a larger initiative for our government to label and pursue what they call left-wing violent terrorism. What were some of the tactics that this group used that are being labeled Antifa? They wore all black. I kid you not. The prosecutor cited that they wore all black and said that is an Antifa tactic. They put their cell phones in a bag so that their phones couldn't be tracked while they were protesting. That's an Antifa tactic, folks. Some of you listening to us, I know this because of No King's Day. Some of you shared that, you lock your phone up, you put it in a Faraday bag, leave it in your car. I don't know. Does that mean you're Antifa now? It's part of a larger initiative that concerns me greatly because look, what I just described to you, wearing similar clothing or symbols or tattoos, checking to see if we're all going to be at the same place at the same time, violently assaulting police officers, not taking your cell phone or shutting it off. You know where we saw that, folks? January 6th, during the insurrection at the Capitol. Did anyone there get 100 years in prison for beating a police officer? Did any woman there get 70 years in prison for that? No. So the focus is on left wing. You've already heard me talk about how our State Department is cajoling our global partners around the world to focus their terrorism programs on left-wing terrorism. We're telling our allies, if we have any left, hey, we all got to row in one direction, and the direction should be left-wing terror. That's where we are. And it comes with related news that this week, again, the evidence that ICE is maintaining a database of protesters, a database that includes facial recognition. Yet again, an ICE agent has told a citizen upon taking her photo that her photo was going in a database. And that should concern all of us, particularly with the powers of facial recognition. We also learned something else this week that I think is related, which is that Todd Blanche, who I guess we're still calling acting attorney general, but Trump has made it clear that Blanche is his man. He's going to be the attorney general unless he fails in confirmation. And by the way, yours truly, I have signed a letter along with well over 1,000 other DOJ alumni protesting the confirmation of Todd Blanche as Attorney General. What did we learn about him this week, among other things? He has new authority. Gee, I wonder who gave him new authority. Who's the head of DOJ? Oh, Todd Blanche. He has new authority given to himself to select the prisons that convicted persons will go to and serve their federal time. Think about that. There are, if you don't know, there are absolutely policies and protocols about the level of security that you get to go to. And I know we've heard a lot about this vis-a-vis Ghislaine Maxwell, who absolutely is in a prison that she should not be in per policy for sex offenders, but she's there. Todd Blanche. Now we have it codified, at least in a paper at DOJ, that Todd Blanche will select the prison that people go to. That, you understand where that's going. He can use that to punish Trump's opponents, right? So even a minor conviction could end, I guess, could put you in Supermax in Florence, Colorado. Or if you're a friend or donor or soon to be donor of President Trump, maybe you've received a big sentence, but you get to go to, oh, I don't know, Danbury, Connecticut, and play tennis in the Federal Correctional Institution there. So I think those stories all go together. And so it's all about selective justice and pursuing Trump's enemies and helping Trump's friends. Anybody have any comments or questions about any of that? Or Chris?
Yeah, I've got a few good straight out questions first. So, can the use of excess punishment be a basis for prejudicial bias and mistrial?
Yes, I like the question. And I like the answer even better. Yes, it could be. And I think on appeal, we should watch this appeal out of the federal courts in Texas on these 8 folks very carefully. I think they've got a shot, folks. Although I'm quick to point out that the federal Court of Appeals for Texas is the Fifth Circuit.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, it's hit or miss on who you get on that appellate court. You know, you start with a panel of 3, but you could go to all 12 judges, and you don't get to pick your appellate court judges overseeing your appeal. So you don't know who you're going to get. But yes, I think in both the area of excess sentencing, particularly if a judge exceeds the sentencing guidelines, that's a clue. And even if they exceed what the prosecutors asked for, that's a clue. And so, yes, I think this appeal is going to be fascinating. And then with regard to the idea of the attorney general handpicking your prison for you, yes, I think there will be appeals there when that happens. Because the written policy isn't going to go away. They might delete it from the DOJ files.
Right.
But the policies established, all kinds of things factor in, like your geography, where's your family, what kind of crime, what kind of security threat do you pose, all of that, medical conditions, all of that gets factored into where you serve your time, and it's pretty strict guidelines about that. So, yeah, the courts have got a hold, but they went along with this, didn't they, in the Antifa prosecution? So, thanks for the question.
Yeah, and similar question, maybe just a little different. I just want to read out loud from Blues and Bob. Is it legal to go over the sentencing guidelines for any offense?
Yeah, it's rare, but yes, a judge would have to articulate why. Why do I think this is a unicorn, a one-off? I need to exceed here. No remorse. But here's what, in this case, you've got this terrorism angle. And but even in the terrorism cases, there are still guidelines. And what I don't see in this case is, for example, all of these members agreeing beforehand, we're going to shoot a police officer. In fact, there's evidence to the contrary there. So if a judge wants to say, well, look, I enhanced the sentence because this group, ultimately their actions led to one of them shooting a police officer. Well, was there any evidence presented that was the intention of the group? In fact, quite honestly, there was not. There's no evidence of that. So, look, I hate that we're talking about who appointed a judge. I hate it because really it hasn't mattered so much up till now. But now, if you read as much as I do of the news reports, there's this disturbing practice. But I get it. When they name a judge, many news platforms now put in parentheses Bush, Trump,
Yeah.
who appointed them. I'm telling you, I'm old enough to remember when we didn't do that. You know why? Because judges were actually supposed to stand for the law and justice. But here we are.
There was a question that actually was not in my first list, but just popped by that was really good. Could a new president pardon them all? Fed charges, not state.
Wow. Yes, they're federal charges. And yes, I'm not sure that an outright pardon is going to happen because, again, one of them shot a cop. But I could easily see a commutation, you served your time. Yeah, I just like Trump thinks he's making things right by pardoning the January Sixers. A new president could come in and very carefully, smartly, not wholesale what Trump did. Trump pardoned people who beat cops, who reoffended and molested children. Right? He just wholesale did it. But
Yeah.
could a new president come in and very carefully have a team of people saying these people got more than they deserved because it was politically biased? Absolutely. This woman got 70 years and should probably do 10. Yes, that kind of analysis, I would say, should happen and actually should be a part of deciding who we vote for. That their commitment to actually righting the ship, so
Right.
to speak. Yeah.
One question that's in the same orbit while we're there, from Joan was, could someone put in a FOIA request to see if they're in the ICE database?
Aha.
Good question, by the way.
Yeah. Well, it's like this. Can you, two-part question. Can you file a FOIA request with the government? Absolutely. To learn about yourself? Absolutely. In this administration, are you likely to get an answer that says, yeah, sure, you're in or you're out?
Right.
And if you're in, here's your file. No. If you're in, what they're going to claim likely is pending investigation, terrorism, national security, right? Since we're labeling everybody a terrorist now who shows up at a protest, apparently. So yes, you can try, but you know, and again, I love this because it's connected to the previous question, which is, are we going to get another leader someday who's going to right the wrongs? And even if you've got that pending FOIA request and you get crickets in response, should a new president and a new attorney general go, hey, this database is filled with people who just showed up at protests and had their photo taken by ICE agents, and I'm mixing the database. Lots of questions for a potential presidential candidate.
That's it in this particular orbit. There's some
Cool.
others that will be good.
Cool. All right.
And I'm keeping track of all the other questions. So for those of you just tuning in, it's question and answer night. And you write down your questions, and I'm taking track of them. I'm consolidating a few of them if they're really close. And yeah, we'll keep going. Thanks
Thank you, Chris. All right. So look, I'm the national security guy, right? So I got to talk about the DNI and Bill Pulte as acting DNI. And now it's becoming clearer why Donald Trump was so intent on getting the mortgage guy, Bill Pulte, as acting DNI. What did we see happen this week? The firings or removals of reportedly hundreds of Office of DNI employees And even what really got my attention, because if you want to make an argument, hey, there's some bloat there, this happens in every bureaucracy, particularly new agencies, they just go bigger, bigger, bigger until they find their critical mass. So you could go, okay, Frank, I'm hearing there were a lot of kind of extra people at DNI, and there might have been. But Bill Pulte comes in on day one, folks, the mortgage man, and says, hundreds of you have to go now. And what got my attention was that included reportedly personnel at the National Counterterrorism Center, NCTC.
Mhm.
Remember, the DNI and NCTC was created after 9/11 to connect the dots and prevent another iconic terror attack on U.S. soil. And rightly so. And rightly so. And I'm very familiar with the work of NCTC. One of the things they do, you're actually familiar with. It's the no-fly list. They decide which suspected or known terrorists can get on an airplane. And ironically, from the earlier question, who our listener here who asked about filing a FOIA to
Right.
see if he or she was in the ICE protest database. Think about this. Our government lets you find out if you're on the no-fly list or the secondary list that you get pulled into secondary for, and you can appeal it. And you might be Mohammed Atta. Well, you're dead because you're the ringleader of 9/11, but you might be a major terrorist. And we still have this system in place. I don't know if any such system exists to know if you're in this ICE facial database. But folks, look, it's not far-fetched if you're trying to scratch your head and say, what in the world is Bill Pulte doing?
Mhm.
Are we vulnerable now because people are being pulled out of the National Counterterrorism Center? And for those who may not be familiar, this is George W. Bush saying, looking at all the facts of 9/11 and saying correctly, the intelligence communities did not play nicely in the sandbox together. There
Right.
was not the kind of fulsome sharing of information. There was not. And I'm not having that happen again. So all of you are going to sit under one roof. All the counterterrorism specialists and those agencies that work counterterror are going to designate people to go sit under one roof. I've been there. I've been in the building many times. Northern Virginia, nice wooded area. You're going to break bread together. You're going to sit in the cafeteria together. Your cubicles are elbow to elbow, agency to agency. We're going to make it almost impossible to not share information. And now Bill Pulte is pulling people out of there, sending them back, in the best case scenario, sending them back to their home agencies. Go home. Go home and don't share anymore. What in God's name really is going on here? And I know I would have sounded crazy a few years ago if I said, God, could this be really about making us more vulnerable to attack? Could it be? But I don't think it's crazy to ponder that anymore. I just don't. All right.
Well, it sort of brings in one of the questions that's on here. Thomas Day asked, "Who are the beneficiaries of removing all the counterterrorism staff?"
Okay.
Perfect, perfect question, Thomas. Thank you.
Yeah, it's good to ask who benefits and who doesn't. And I think there's a few things going on. Never jump to the crazy conspiracy theory like, oh my God, he's trying to kill us. Don't go there first when you can actually say, is this about Trump being pissed about the intelligence community not liking him? Is this about his idea of a deep state and not enough people are gone? Like at a minimum of 1,000 FBI personnel are gone, right? In a relatively small agency. Um, is this about, so let's go with the obvious. Trump can't stand that there are career experts who know national security better than he does. Remember Helsinki, folks. He's standing there on stage with Putin, and he says, contrary to what his own intel community has told him, that Putin tried to help him in the election. And he goes, I don't know why Putin would do that. I don't know why he would, right? Discounting his own intel community. He doesn't like to be wrong. He doesn't like to be challenged. And it could be that he told Pulte, look, day one, get rid of these smartasses who think they know everything. That could be one. Two, I'm hearing that Tulsi, a lot of these people came in with Tulsi Gabbard as DNI, and Trump apparently doesn't care for Tulsi because Tulsi's not there anymore. Okay, so some of those people are going. The other thing more obvious than the conspiracy theories is I know he listens to retired MAGA intel community people. And what might they be whispering in his ear, particularly old grizzled veterans of the intel community? DNI is a waste of time. It's like getting called to the principal's office. We function just fine. CIA and FBI function just fine before this, this office tells us what to do. This office controls our budget. This is bureaucracy at its worst. So if he's listening to those people, that also could result in him telling Pulte, clean that place out. We don't need that anymore. Yeah, it's possible. So who benefits? Well, again, if it's Trump's ego, okay, but I hate to sound snide here, but who benefits? Terrorists and spies benefit when people aren't coming together every day under the same roof, working together to counter foreign intelligence services and terrorist organizations. And if Trump is headed toward a DNI and an entire intelligence community focused on U.S. citizens, focused on Antifa, you got to get rid of people who are going to sit there and go, what? What are you talking about? We can't do that. We're not supposed to spy on Americans. And there is no Antifa. He can't have that. You got to get rid of those people before you can replace them with your own lackeys.
BCZ says, could his hatred be because the IC understands Russia and was aware of things Trump doesn't want them noticing and following?
Oh, for sure. Oh, for sure. Yeah. I think that Trump's mindset is any layers of bureaucracy between that get in my way to order things to happen, it is bad. And so if you're getting in my way of saying Russia's my friend, Putin's not so bad, because you have teams of people who work Russia every day. Right. And remember from his first term, we were hearing reports that he didn't want to hear anything in his briefing about Russia. He didn't want to hear it. And so, yes, good question. Yes, he could be sick and tired of hearing about Russia spying on us and how Putin's bad. And so what do? Kill the messenger, right? Who's telling me this? Why does this keep showing up in my briefing? And so get rid of it. Yes, that could be a factor. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, on this particular topic, that's mostly what people have said. They've got a lot of other small bits that I know you.
Yeah, we'll try to get to those.
But on this one, that's it.
Okay. So let's go to, before I get off the DNI thing, look.
Sure.
It's clear that the new DNI that was nominated and then his nomination was kind of pulled, Jay Clayton, the current U.S. Attorney, Southern District of New York, who many moderates were like, yeah, okay, fine. At least, the guy's a lawyer. He understands the Constitution. Okay. Then Trump told Clayton, don't show up for your scheduled nomination hearing. Imagine that. Imagine you call the guy and go, never mind. And you start tying it to all this other stuff. he could have had Clayton, reportedly, he could have had Clayton confirmed in 1 week. Clayton could already be the DNI. But it's becoming quite clear to me that Trump was concerned that Clayton was just too reasonable. That he wouldn't show up on day one and fire everybody, right? Because he's reasonable. He would have asked some questions first. So this is what's going on. And do I think Pulte is done? Do I think the only mission Trump gave Pulte was get rid of hundreds of people?
Right.
No, I do not.
Right.
No, I do not. More is coming. All right. So let's go to my next kind of story that grabbed me this week. And it's kind of a good news story, but also it's a clue that we're in for a fight. A federal judge has ordered the remaining Epstein files to be released. Okay. It is the law. There's plenty of evidence that about 3 million files remain that we haven't seen. And the judge is saying you got to do it or you got to tell me why. Why not? And so here's my thing to watch in the days and weeks ahead. How vehemently is DOJ going to fight this judge? That's what we need to look at. And they're going to couch it, folks, right? So why do I say that? Because it's a no-brainer for DOJ to go, okay, it's a federal judge. We stand for justice and we're being ordered to do it. And there's nothing there, right? Because we've said to the public, there's duplicative files. We've said over and over again, Trump's not involved. So just release it and be done with it. But here's what I think we're in for. And we need to see how strongly they oppose this judge's order. We're going to get this strong fight. And they're going to claim everything under the sun to not release this. What do I mean by that? We're going to see then say a judge has no business telling a judicial branch judge has no business telling the executive branch DOJ what to do. There are files. We're going to see that argument. Absolutely. We've seen them try this before in other areas. Mm-hmm. So they're trying it with the IRS so-called settlement and the slush fund. That judge in that case is saying, hey, I didn't agree to any settlement for the slush fund. And DOJ is saying, you're a judge. Stay in your lane. Stay in your lane. We do what we want here. And you're going to see it here. And every time you hear DOJ say, no, we're not releasing, we're not complying with the federal judge's order, you need to look at that and say, aha, that's not about some separation of powers argument. That's about separating Trump from exposure. That's the next thing to keep your eye on. All right.
Ready for some questions on that?
Yes.
Okay. So, and one of them, some of these were actually on from near the beginning, so you hit them. Why didn't anyone in Congress bring the lawsuit against DOJ that Katie Phang filed? What are your opinions of the events to date of Phang versus Blanche, essentially? So.
Oh, yeah. Boy, wow, Katie Phang's really got a good case going. And I'm going to tell you, when I heard Katie was filing this, I went, I don't know about that. I don't know about standing. I don't know if anybody's going to salute this. And God, it seems to be working so far. So kudos. We need more of that. Why didn't DOJ do it? Why? Is that a rhetorical question? I mean,
no, I didn't know. Why didn't anyone in Congress bring the lawsuit?
Oh, Congress.
DOJ? Yeah, that Katie Phang filed. Why did it take her doing it? And actually, it's a question I asked. I asked this to Martin Zaid, being a lawyer who does this kind of thing. I said, can you unravel as a lawyer this, mixed martial arts match that happened in front of the White House? And what I mainly wanted him to explain was how hard it is to come up with standing when we clearly see something violated, but who is it that's going to bring it?
Yeah.
And he goes, Chris, that's That's literally one of the biggest questions we engage in as we do everything we do.
The question of who has
Who the hell
standing?
is going to have standing? Yeah, who the hell
Yeah,
is going to have standing with this
yeah.
particular? Like, if it's a
So look,
DC thing, is it someone who lives in DC? Well, is that
yeah,
enough? Is it not?
look,
Is it so? Yeah.
Congress. Well, somebody out there can correct me if I'm wrong. I think Congress tried to bring a suit. Um, they passed the law, and I think they tried. I'm not sure it worked, but look, whatever works. I'm not going to become a political commentator on and talk about whether I think certain members of Congress should be more vehement and fight more. But if it's working for Katie Phang, let's keep going. Let's do it. Yeah, yeah. I'm watching it like you are, folks. I'm watching it like you are.
And also earlier, Dave Van Kuren had asked Frank, since Blanche won't put in filing the weaponization fund is dead, it's probably alive and well. My theory from the beginning has been that since Trump imagines himself as the biggest victim of all, that he's always intended to make himself the true beneficiary. What are your thoughts?
Yep, and there's a couple of comments, Chris, about your mic and the clarity.
It's right here, whatever is on the headset. So
Okay.
we'll try it.
It's
Sorry,
not.
thanks.
It's
Thank you.
oh, that actually sounds a little better. Yeah.
There we go.
Okay. So the question. Well, tell me the question again.
Sure. Since Blanche won't put in writing that the weaponization fund is dead, it's probably alive and well.
Oh yeah.
And is the theory essentially that Trump ultimately is the biggest beneficiary of whatever this does anyway?
Yeah. Blanche's refusal to put in writing that they are not moving forward with the slush fund is the clearest indicator so far that Trump wants to pay what would essentially become a kind of standing militia, a compensated militia. He is increasingly panicked. This is my opinion. This is what you pay for or no, or don't pay for. He is increasingly panicked about the midterms. He sees the polls. There are Republicans whispering in his ear that we're dead. And he's making ridiculous comments like, I don't care about the midterms. Folks, he needs people to be on standby, stand back and stand by, as he told the Proud Boys. He needs them to potentially call them up. And if he's seen as reneging on his promise to take care of those insurrectionists, he will not be able to activate and trigger their deployment during the lead up to the midterms. And actually, after the midterm results don't go his way, the goal is in the back of his head, I believe, to be able to possibly use the Insurrection Act to create violence in certain key places, not everywhere, but swing states, that allows either him to hit a pause button on the elections or declare them to be rigged. Yeah, that's what I think. Because look, think about it. What's his reputation as a businessman? He doesn't pay full price. He never pays his contractors full price. The lawsuits are out the door from contractors who got stiffed by him. Why all of a sudden would he be so passionate about paying these people who did something for him? That would be a first. So, yeah, there's a reason behind it. And he's told Blanche, I think, again, this is my opinion based on my evidence. I believe he's told Blanche, we got to make this happen somehow. The Republicans who have some sanity left, if there are any, they're telling him, We don't like this at all. This is a bad look, man. Some of these people not only beat cops, but then they went out and raped kids, and we can't give them money. So I think I think he's got it as part of this plan in his head. It's all this preparing for November. Really, I really think that.
Well, there's actually some questions that have been looming in the space related to this a bit. So let me put them in here. Actually, I'm trying to grab Laura's because it's a perfectly good one to go at the end of this. The first one, if Congress takes a break over the 4th of July weekend, does that give the president a chance to force this SAVE Act inserted in the housing bill? Because, for our viewers, of course, taking care of your affordable housing was put on hold. We got to interfere with the midterms. So that's one of the questions. Related to it, just so I can put a couple in there all together, is what is Congress doing about voter suppression? Also a question, what is Congress doing to introduce new legislation about federal agents and military at polling stations? So why don't we kind of leave those three on the block there for a minute?
Yeah. All right. So I'm not a parliamentarian regarding Congress, and I think with regard to the question of was it the Senate that's home right now because they got nothing to do, but July 4th weekend or week, can Trump push through, perhaps through some form of executive order or something, the SAVE Act? I don't think so, but that doesn't mean he won't try.
Mhm.
It doesn't mean he won't try. I think he will have a mutiny on his hands. There are a fair number of Republicans who have serious issues with the SAVE Act. I had as a guest on my show Juliette Kayyem, a former Assistant Secretary of Homeland Security. She told us something on the show that really I had not heard before, and it makes perfect sense. And that is the people she's talking to, the Republicans she's talking to. You know why? One of the reasons they're not happy with the SAVE Act, it's the part of the identification part where you got to show your birth certificate or your passport to prove who you are to vote. She pointed out that they know that conservative right-wing women are more likely to change their name when they get married, and they can't prove who they are. And the hassle of getting some kind of new birth certificate or getting your new passport means that, in Juliet's terms, it's either the SAVE Act is either a wash, meaning it affects people equally, women, or it's detrimental, particularly to Republican women. And it seems to me and to her that the Republican lawmakers are very aware of this. And if they, go to their home districts and hear from their female constituents that hold on a second, I can't vote. That's an issue. Now, a separate issue entirely is, this whole trad wife movement where unbelievable. I've seen women interviewed repeatedly at various conferences and things where they go, yeah, whatever. My husband can vote for me. I'm good with that. It's no, one woman said something like, she was asked, if you get married someday, are you okay with your husband voting for you and you can't vote? And her response was, I will be marrying a man of God who will make the right decisions. And I'm okay with that. Okay. So, I don't know what's going on, but the July 4th break thing, is he going to try something? Possibly. Does it work? Does it backfire in his face? Yes, I think so. What were the other related questions?
Well, sort of in that, all of that is, have you seen anything coming from Congress trying to deal with either voter suppression and or inhibiting this use of agents and or military or other at polling stations? Is there anyone in Congress trying to take action to stop that? That was a couple of questions from different people combined.
Yeah, yes, there are. And my column this week is focused on, among other things, troops and agents at the polls and all the warning signs and indicators that that's going to happen. And the states in some ways are doing more than Congress to fight this. They're passing laws and they're saying, you can't get near our polling places. Some of the Congress members working on this issue include Raskin. There's a lot of behind. My understanding is there's a lot of behind the scenes bipartisan discussions in the gym and the cafeteria on Capitol Hill.
Well,
Right.
Laura points out, though, correctly, I think that's important, that 18 U.S. Code Section 529 already prohibits federal agents and military at polling stations. So it's more about how are you going to enforce these?
Yeah.
Which is sort of like there's a few questions in this mix that are actually about the same type of thing. So let me bundle them. For instance, when does it become traitorous behavior? This is how the question was written. For not upholding the Constitution, Congress takes an oath, correct? Doesn't the Supreme Court take an oath? But also, do we have a working Constitution? Or do you think our judicial can be right into the future? So all these are in this sort of the same mix of
Yeah.
where we at with what is taken as oath and or the responsibility. And when they just decide,
Yeah. I mean, Chris, a lot of our officials have thrown up their hands clearly that are around Trump. Yes, yes, the Constitution says that the states administer the elections. The federal government role is to kind of set the big picture, and then allow the states to administer it. And there's beauty in that chaos. Often when I talk to international colleagues of mine, they look at our system and go, "What a chaotic mess." And you have 50 states doing 50 different ways of elections. And I go, no, 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 no. That's a beauty because there's no single point of failure. And every time you have a MAGA friend telling you, why don't we just federalize elections? Why don't we have this national mandate on how to do this? Well, because then you're putting the control of the elections in one man's hands. You really are. And it's not constitutional. So my concern with this, and yes, there's a law, Title 18, that talks about no troops, no agents. Yeah, but it's not absolutely all inclusive, never ever, under some circumstances. And so there is perceived wiggle room there. And the problem is, while all of this might actually come out successfully when challenged in court, whatever Trump tries, speaking of a good news story, challenged in court, this week, a federal judge said, hey, this business of you using the using this DHS Social Security database,
right.
to figure out who gets to vote. No, the federal judge said.
Which state was that succeeded in particular?
I don't know where that federal judge sits, but there is a win. Now that's not the entire SAVE Act. She didn't say the whole SAVE Act is out the door. She said the part of the SAVE Act where you're going to use this database to determine who gets to vote. And, you can balance that good news with the fact that this week, the Postmaster General of the United States, when asked about, hey, are you going to deliver mail-in ballots to everybody? Or are you going to figure out who gets the ballots? And he said, we're going to figure out who gets the ballots, mail-in ballots. So what's my point? All of this can go to court and win, but the mess it's going to create right up to and after November is so bad that Trump wins. This is the point I make in my column. Trump wins because of the chaos. Trump gets to say, you see, That was rigged. That state, that county, that swing state, they didn't do what I said. And now we have bad mail-in ballots. And now it is a battle royale that's going to play out in the courts. And God, I hope it's only playing out in the courts and not in the streets. But the chaos around it is going to cause confusion, perhaps like we have not seen since the hanging chads of Palm Beach County, Florida, in Gore versus Bush.
Can states send their National Guards to protect polling stations?
Yes, and I believe there are states right now that are discussing how to do that. I have to tell you, the tabletop exercise on this is pretty darn scary because you could have armed National Guard troops under a governor doing battle with, how about this, active duty U.S. military? How about National Guard troops from Texas or Oklahoma, red states, who agree to be deployed to California, blue state, and they face off with California National Guard under the governor, and they're operating under the president. I mean, look, I got paid to think of these worst case scenarios, but
Yeah.
how about California state troopers facing off with Trump's National Guard deployed there?
Or a hybrid Trump force,
Yeah.
which is
Well,
quite possible. You know,
yeah. Then we're back to the slush fund and whether
a
we see,
non-governmental intelligence agency called First
yeah,
Praetorian Guard.
yeah,
That's an example.
yeah.
Not to give them free advertisement today, but still.
The key here is to get as much of this worked out in the federal courts as we can before November. What we don't want is people rushing, to court, and it's going to happen inevitably, the week of the election and thereafter, and having these challenges play out, and everybody going either I don't need to vote, it doesn't matter, or I can't believe the outcome, doesn't matter. That's really troubling. And the problem with, we talked earlier about legal standing. Well, if you've got this idea like we just came up with, hey, how about if National Guard faces off against troopers? How about blah, 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 right? A judge is going to go, okay, I'm sorry, you're bringing this now in July. It hasn't happened. And you have, you give me, there's a concept of the law saying you've got to have an active dispute. You don't have anything active right now. You have conjecture, and you want me to rule on something that hasn't happened. So you can't work everything out, but you can work a lot out, and we should before November.
I have a quote, someone, it's not a question, but a good quote that passed by as you and I were saying is, you cannot suspend imagination when considering this regime.
This is I love that. In the risk and threat world, they call this the black swan concept. The idea that something is so rare or unlikely that we can't even waste time thinking about it. The black swan. And yes, we should be talking and thinking about the black swan. Because you know what? You see black swans more than you think. So
Yeah,
it's worth thinking about. Hey, there's another. I'll end. I want to get one more story in because I'm the national security guy. So look, a senior official at NSA, the National Security Agency, sometimes in the intelligence community referred to as no such agency, because we don't talk about it. A senior official at NSA has confirmed, boy, this is rare, that Mythos, an Anthropic artificial intelligence product, broke into almost all of its classified systems
in record time.
Not in weeks, but in hours. If there's any good news, it was part of authorized testing to see if an AI product could actually break through all of the NSA's systems, and it did. So the government has now called timeout on Anthropic's Mythos system, and really they don't want anybody using it, especially if they're a foreign individual. So we called timeout, and we got to figure this out, folks. But let me assure you something. China, Russia, Iran, and North Korea are not calling timeout on AI. And they'll break into our systems in weeks, not hours. AI is way out in front of us, folks. But I'm glad that we did testing. Disturbed that it ate us for lunch. Good news stories. We already, if you joined us very early, you heard the good news that Gracie the giraffe has been recovered safely after a 12-day fugitive hunt in Texas Hill Country, where she escaped from a kind of exotic wildlife ranch there. I won't get into my opinion of exotic wildlife ranches. But then the other good news story is that Greg Phillips, the senior FEMA official, who think about this man led the Office of Response and Recovery for FEMA. He claimed he's been multiple times, he's been teleported, including being teleported 50 miles away to a Waffle House one time. And when questioned hard about that stuff, he said, there's biblical support for this kind of teleportation. That's what I was involved in. And according to CNN sources, Mr. Phillips has now been teleported out of FEMA. he's no longer there, or at least they think he's no longer there. We don't know because, teleporting. But he's gone. Even he was too embarrassed. Even the Trump administration was too embarrassed. More importantly, he had a lot of violent rhetoric on social media accounts.
Yeah.
It's pretty scary. And his response to all of this and people making fun of his teleportation claims was, quote, haters gonna hate, unquote. And so that's the closing thought here on Frank Fridays. Enjoy a safe and restful weekend. Thank you to Chris Sampson, live from Ukraine. If you don't follow Chris Sampson on Substack, you should. His writing, his photojournalism, and his reporting from Iran are worth the price of admission. Thank you, Chris.
And to everyone, I want to say thanks to Frank for being someone who takes the time to talk to us about what we are very curious about in law enforcement, questions we are riddled with now with our daily headlines. And I've said it since we got on this platform. You have a chance to build your own good experience network instead of waiting that passive way on MSNBC, CNN, etc. These guys are available to you for a really ridiculously reasonable price. The monthly, if you just do the monthly alone, it really helps them focus entirely on this content. And I can tell you from someone who gets to watch more than just Frank do this work behind the scenes, they really enjoy doing this with you. And it's work.
Yeah.
There's a lot of time where
I'm having fun. I'm much freer than I could be on cable TV. Yeah. Thanks for joining. Thanks, everybody. I got to go.
see you
Take
soon.
care.